since then, I spend 99% of my time thinking about early stage companies and teaching folks the basic building blocks of growing a firm. So thank you all for having me, and I'm excited for the discussion.
Hey, John, tell the people how old you are.
I am 24.
Slackers. I'm just going to ask you one question, I'm going to turn to Dave. Now, as I see the world, and I've done this myself, there's two kinds of people in the business world. Those who have made cold calls and those who have not made cold calls.
Oh, man.
And I can tell the difference when my wife and I get a cold call at home.
Yeah.
My wife is, I'm going to call the Attorney General on you. Bam. And mine is, I really don't need it right now, but you keep up the good work. Keep working hard.
That's right.
Because I've done it. Tell us about making cold calls and how you make it work.
Man, it was the scariest thing. The scariest decision I ever made was to leave school. But at the time, it felt like the right decision, and it certainly has paid off. But when I left school, at some point, my business was growing, and it was costing me more money to stay in the classroom. And I decided, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to give it a real honest shot. And I know I can get a job anywhere, anytime. But this entrepreneurship thing, this was a unique opportunity at a unique time. And so to your point, when I opened up my time, what that afforded me, leaving school, what it afforded me was time. And I had to make the best use of it. And the best use was pounding pavement, dialing for dollars, and just going up to people. And at first I was so nervous, and they could tell my voice would shake, and they would have rebuttals. But you learn intuitively, okay, if I present a solution this way, they're going to say this, I can sidestep here. So it's like Tai Chi. Jack Ma from Alibaba talks about that. If they come here, you go there. They come from up, you go down low. You don't meet it with resistance. And so cold calling and selling is something that I enjoy much of. I think sales kind of gets a bad rap. I think it's all about connecting with someone in a very human way, and they'll open up to you.
Yeah, especially as a doorman.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, Dave, you're older than 24.
So the year John was born, I was 42.
Wow.
So yes.
Then he stayed 42 for about 10 or 12 more years and moved on.
Yeah.
We're going to hear two radically different stories here, Dave. Why don't you tell us your own?
Well, I'm trying to think about some parallels, and there are a couple that might be interesting. I grew up in Hutchinson. My dad was the scoutmaster in Boy Scouts, Troop 301, for 25 years. And he taught me, much like your parents taught you, he taught me the importance of hard work, the importance of doing what you say you're going to do.
Sure.
Much the same lessons that you're describing. And he drove that home, and I believe, the stuff they taught you in Boy Scouts, which I still believe today. And I thought it was really, really useful for me. Anyway, after growing up in Hutchinson, I went to the University of Kansas. You all may be interested. I was student body president at KU, and I don't know, a long time ago. Hard to remember when. But I went to KU, graduated there in business, accounting, business administration, so I wanted to learn that field. I went to SMU Law School, passed the bar, but never practiced law, never practiced as an accountant. Used both of them as background. But then we moved to Denver, Colorado, and I went through a management training program. So growing up, all of the part-time jobs I had, summer and all that stuff, were at Dillon's. Were carrying out groceries, stocking shelves. I worked, one time I worked in our dairy, made ice cream, worked at one of our warehouses, stuff like that. And at that time, and then in this early training program, I learned a similar lesson to what you learned, particularly as a doorman. And that is that there's real dignity in the work itself. I had a guy who, I was washing and waxing floors in the graveyard shift in Denver, Colorado, and the guy turns to me, he said, I got a feeling, Dave, that you're not going to be washing and waxing floors for a lot of years. I've been here, at that time, I don't remember, 10 or 20 years. And he said, but I want you to learn one thing. He said, there's a lot of dignity in this job, and there's a lot of pride in doing it well. And so never feel like this job isn't important. Carry out's the same thing. But that lesson that he taught me that one night has stayed with me my whole life, because I viewed, I'll go up to a new checker class, the folks who check you out in the grocery store, and I'll see them all gathered around, they're new in the company, and they're learning how to check people out. And I'll say to them, I know you think you're learning your job, and you're learning the actual activities you go through while you're doing your job, but your real job is to connect with the people that come through the line, and it may sound a little too strong, but your job is to make their day just a smidgen better than it was when they came in the store. Doesn't need to be much. It may be a smile, it may be hello, it may be thank you very much. It's whatever you want it to be, but you can make a difference. And so at Kroger, we ended up touching the lives of roughly 10% of the U.S. population every week. And if we could just make those days just a smidgen better for anybody, now that's a mission. And so I was mission driven, and many of the people that I worked with were emotionally mission driven to actually make a difference, to connect with people on a very human basis, exactly what you were saying. So I ended up coming back to Hutchinson after I'd been to Denver and Phoenix, working in our grocery stores there. And by then Kroger had bought Dillon's. Dillon's was started by my great-grandfather back roughly at the turn of the century, not this century, but the last one. And but I really was almost at that point, not quite then. I was almost the last member of the family in the business, and so it really had grown from being a family business. It was on the New York Stock Exchange. Kroger bought the company, and I kind of thought that'd be the end of my career. So I thought, well, I guess I can always go try to practice law, or hadn't thought about dry cleaning, but that's a great tip. But I was really thinking about other things. And the chairman and CEO of Kroger said, you know, every company needs good leaders. Stick around and see where it goes. Well, he retired, and my boss from Dillon's, Joe Pickler, who'd been the dean of the business school at KU, became the next CEO of Kroger, and I became the next one after Joe, so I guess it did pay to stay. But I really have looked at the company, even though it's a big company, very big actually, I've always thought of it as a small company. And I've always thought that you win customers one at a time, you lose them pretty damn fast, but you lose them one at a time too. But you got to pay attention to every single one of them, because if you don't, you're gonna miss the reason that you're there, which is a very similar lesson, I think.
Love it.
Yeah, you know, it's we were talking about this earlier, but Dave was talking about how you run a big company as though it was a small company, and you have to think about that. And I'm going to ask John this as a question in his own career, but just one anecdote from the past. If you run a small company, sometimes you have to run it as though it were a big company. Yeah. And it's a classic case of Ewing Marion Kaufman. Those of you who remember Marion Labs, when he started his business in the basement of his house, he had to decide what to call it. And he figured if he called it Kaufman Labs, people would think it was a one-person shop. So he used his middle name, Marion, and called it Marion Labs, and made gave the impression at least that there was, a huge company like Dillon and Associates now, consulting firm, correct? John, any examples like that where you had to play bigger than?
Oh, definitely. I was telling the younger folks earlier that there was a lot of that, and so in the early days. In New York City, 212 is the landline number for Manhattan. And so I went to AT&T and I paid the guy $200 underneath the counter, and I was like, hey, I want a cell phone number that's 212. And so, folks thought they were calling like a big old place, but they were just calling my cell phone, and I was like, and another great one is I had an assistant that was really just me. Her name was Lisa, and so when you would email info@JohnHenryCleaners, it was it's just me. And sometimes my customers would call and ask to speak to Lisa, and I'd be like, oh, she's not available at the moment. So those are just kind of the early thing. And I would always dress in a suit. Just to kind of compensate, and I had braces in those days, so it was so tough to like.
13 years old, right?
Yeah, I remember sitting down with a property manager. At some point, we had the idea to secure contracts with buildings in New York City. There's very large multifamily developments, and you can secure an exclusive contract with that building to be the sole dry cleaner that provides the service for their residents. And so I sat down with the property manager And I must have been 19, and I went with my suit and my briefcase, and I sat down, and I have a bit of a deeper voice, so maybe I sounded older on the phone. She says, "Hey, John, nice to meet you." She says, "You look like you're young. Like, how old are you?" I said, "Oh, old enough." I tried to glance over it, and she laughed. And when we sat down to finally do business, she goes, "No, seriously, how old are you?" And I said, I was just honest with her. I said, I didn't get the contract because she felt uncomfortable with how, I must have been, inexperienced at that time. We actually ended up doing business later, right? So it pays to stay persistent. I would just call her all the time. "Hey, Gloria, how are you? Just checking in." And she'd be like, "John, leave me alone," but like I would follow up consistently. And eventually, towards the very end, actually, I was already in negotiations to sell the business, and I secured that contract for the seller or for the buyer right before selling. I thought that was cool, but yeah, plenty of stuff like that.
In fact, I think there's another point there, and I think if you talk to the most successful people in business, that persistence, is the
maniacal persistence.
Yeah. You do something once, and people will yield to you. Now, I'm going to throw this question back to Dave, but first, I really hate to ask people to raise their hands on questions, but this is a critical decision that everyone in this room has been asked, and you're asked it often, and I'm just curious to see the demographics of how it breaks out. Okay, first, paper, and then plastic. Paper. When you go to a grocery store, how many of you ask for paper? How many of you ask for plastic?
Take your own.
Bring your own. How many bring your own? How many bring your own? Dave, what's the national breakout? I asked, when I go to the grocery store, I ask the checkers. I said, what's winning here? Paper or plastic?
Plastic by a mile.
Is that right? Yeah. So
actually, increasingly though, people are bringing their own bags.
Yeah.
And we do the same.
Now, regulation is a major part of running any business, especially a big business. Let's start with the plastic, the whole ban on plastic. How does that affect you guys?
It depends on how it is done.
Yeah.
It can affect us in a really negative way, or it can affect us in a positive way. Ultimately, we want whatever the community really wants, but we want to make sure it doesn't increase the cost of the groceries that the people in the community have to pay. And so we advocate for things that ban plastic if you'd like, ban paper if you want. Make people bring their own and buy plastic if they're going to, or buy paper, either one, if they come in. If you do that, that actually works pretty well. Communities, if they accept that, it works great. Works for them, and it ends up working for us. And by working for us, I don't mean makes more money for us, because ultimately the issue at Kroger is pure and simple, and Dillon's the same way, is that every nickel we save, literally, every nickel we can find a way to save, we plow back into something ultimately that matters to the customer, either in lower prices or in better services. And we've lowered prices at Dillon's now every year for over 10 years from the year before. Wow. And we did that by lowering those costs. So lowering costs on bags is important to us. If you cause us to raise costs on bags by putting in regulations, that cost gets passed back in higher prices or something by everybody, not just us. And that's not a good thing for the community. So we look for ways to make it work for everybody.
Let me ask one question to both of you, and it's on different ends of the question. Dave, you grew up in a business where your family is fairly dominant. Say, their name is on the original company. You're always being watched and judged by everyone that comes around you, right?
Yeah.
And John, you're growing up in a world where no one cares what you do, and no one is watching what you do. So the motivation has to be a little bit different. I'm going to start with Dave. How do you deal with that kind of scrutiny?
Well, two ways. The first is I actually originally did not plan to go in the grocery business. That's how I dealt with it, was I avoided it. And that was my plan. That's why I got the degree I did. That's why I went to law school. I'm not exactly sure I remember what I had planned to do, but I had big plans. But then my cousin, who was then the president of the company, took me aside in my second year of law school and says, "Dave, we're a public company. We're on the New York Stock Exchange then." And he said, "We cannot hire family members and just give them jobs. Now, we can give you a training role, as we do a lot of other people, and I will give you 2 years of training if you want it, but after that, you're absolutely on your own. Any job you get here, you will have earned, and any job you don't get here, you will have earned. So if you want to come, great. We'd be happy to have you. If you don't want to come, that's fine too. Just wanted you to know the way the deal was going to work." That actually convinced me to go to work for him. because that actually avoided that exact point, I think. Because I did not want a job or any situation that people would just say he was giving that.
Right.
I wanted to earn my way, and that made a difference. Then the second thing is, I've always said to myself, particularly when you work in a family company, you've got to work harder than everybody else just to make sure you don't look like you think you can slack it off. So I really put my shoulder into it. I didn't shave my back, but other than that, I put my shoulder into it, and I did everything I could to try to make a difference. And I think it worked that way.
Now, John, in your case is the opposite in a sense. No one's watching you.
When you're a small company.
Right.
Right.
Or, except for Lisa, of course, who's
That's right.
And so, do you ever reach a point where you're saying to yourself, "Does this make any sense? Can I do this? Am I doing what I should be doing?"
Totally. I think it's a massive advantage that no one's watching. It's a massive advantage because the very same disadvantage that exists for early stage companies, which is you're strapped on resources, you don't have as big of a team, your competitors are better funded, but at the same time, your competitors that are better funded and have big teams, like a company, perhaps like Kroger, they're the Titanic, and anytime they have to move in a different direction, you got to steer this big old thing, and it's not going to move as quickly. So early stage companies, we're nimble. That's your biggest advantage. You're quick. The feedback cycle is immediate. You can make a decision and immediately pivot. So when I have an idea for a feature or a product, I will select my most loyal customer segment of my customer base. Say, hey, what do you think about this? I'll give you 15 days, 30 days. Try it out. Let me know what you think. I'll grandfather you in at a low rate. It doesn't matter. Your most loyal customers tend to be the most forgiving, and they will adopt or test out any feature that you guys have in mind. It's so important. My favorite entrepreneur of all time, perhaps, is Jeff Bezos. And Jeff Bezos just released his annual shareholder letter, and he reaffirmed the same thing that he wrote in his 1997 shareholder letter, and that is that Amazon is a day one company. What does that mean? That means that they're just starting out. The moment that you become a day two company, which is you're resting on your laurels a little bit, your decline begins, and it may be gradual, but sure enough, it begins. And so when you're a day one company, when you constantly treat yourself like you're the young player, you're new market entrant, you have to grow, it really just impacts the culture from the top down. And so, anyways, I think it's a massive advantage, and I think being nimble and not being watched means nothing and everything all at once.
Dave, question to you. Do you have an entrepreneurial hero?
There's a lot to choose from. Jeff would be one of them.
Yeah, great.
And I've spent some time with him.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he is awesome. He's a big competitor now. He's changed he's rocked the world.
Keeps every CEO up at night.
Is he running a supermarket now, or is he sort of? Yeah.
He is. Yeah, he is.
And the guy who started Costco is another hero of mine. I've spent some time with him too. There's a lot of lessons to learn from folks like that. And if I flip that around and think about it from the point of view of a big company, it's true. You can't take a big company and turn them in some other direction quickly. If you do, you're likely to get whiplash, and you're likely to go broke because if it doesn't go right, you got a lot at risk.
Right.
So we used to test a lot of stuff. We test in the market if we wanted to change a pricing strategy, structure, we'd try it out, make sure it worked, and then we'd go elsewhere. If you didn't do that, it'd be problematic. But we used to talk about the fact that Kroger was founded in 1883, so it's been around a long time, and they've had to change a whole lot of times. And in the 1930s, Kroger had twice the number of stores that it has today, which is interesting.
Wow.
Now, they were tiny stores, but just think about trying to take over 5,000, 5,500 stores. Then they had to change those stores into something that worked today over time. Now, that's a lot of change. That meant that they had to really act like an entrepreneur and say, what does the customer want today rather than what they want.
Exactly.
Very good. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions from the audience.
I want to build off that point quickly, if I may. I host a podcast for eBay, and so a lot of what I do effectively, I'm a part-time journalist, and I go and interview people around the country. But I had the pleasure of sitting down with the Marriott family. And did you know that they began as a hot dog stand, selling root beers, and that was their business for 30 years. But the key to their success has been that constant reinvention. They always reinvent themselves. And, you know, they experimented with motels and eventually hotels and so forth. But I just wanted to build off that. And
if you think about Marriott, Bill never gets comfortable. He goes to his hotels all the time.
That's right.
Never gets comfortable with what he sees. He always is looking. He's never satisfied, always looking for the next way to improve.
Very good.
That's awesome.
Back here? Yes, sir. And stand up and speak up.
I'm Stan Rasmussen. I live in Lawrence, Kansas. I work with the Department of Defense, and I'm part of the class of 2007. Ask you guys about the importance of mentorship, because John, it sounds like you're kind of a professional mentor now. And Dave, I'd like to ask you about what you see the role of mentorship in business today and where you see that heading. So if you guys could just kind of talk about and reflect on.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that has been absolutely invaluable to me. I remember one of my first mentors was this Italian guy. He's got this heavy accent. And I remember when I originally met him, he lived in Midtown in a nice building. So my business pitch to him was like, hey, use my dry cleaner and sign up your neighbor and I'll give you 5% of the sales that they bring. And he's like, oh, this kid's a disaster. And the best mentors will sit down with you and get emotionally invested in your personal development, your career development, and do it for nothing in return. And it got to the point where we were sitting, my wife would say, Tommaso, why are you spending so much time with this kid? And he said, I don't know, but he, you know, he's got something. And we would sit down, and those sessions with Tommaso just truly expanded my business acumen at a rate that would have taken me years otherwise on my own. So it's been absolutely invaluable to me, and that's the role it's played in my life. I'm a bit of a mentor now to my portfolio companies, but I got a ways to go before I can offer that caliber of advice I feel that Tommaso offered to me.
Yeah. Dave?
Wow. I'll tell you two things about mentoring. First is that I've asked every division president at Kroger, and there's over 20 there, regularly, what helped them in their career preparing for their job. And always they have a mentor, not necessarily formal, it's often informal, much like what you just described, people you come in contact with that you spend a little time around. But maybe the more instructive story is to tell you my own biggest failure, which relates to mentorship. Back when I was at Fry's in Phoenix, that was a division of Dillon's, now a division of Kroger, still operates under the name Fry. Chuck Fry, who was one of the two brothers who founded it, was retired by then. I'd become in charge of merchandising for the division, and I was unequipped, technically unequipped to do the job. I didn't know that, but I was. And I also didn't know that I was failing miserably in the role. My boss had put me in that job believing that if you could be a decent leader of people, you could do most any job. And he did not give me the technical skill that I needed. It didn't help me understand that. Chuck Fry came back to work from retirement, and to make a really long story short, tested me a few times to see whether or not I could learn from him and would be willing to learn from him. He determined I would, and from that point for a year and a half, 7 days a week, about an hour every day, on the phone or in person, he spent time with me teaching me the technical side of the business that I did not learn before in merchandising, and turned me into a fairly decent merchant. That had he not been willing to spend that time, I would have been miserable, and I would have sunk a whole lot of people who were working in the merchandising department. So that taught me rather clearly that there's certain things you need to learn in a job. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the only way to learn that are from the people who have learned it over their lifespan. And so I sought them out, and then I started trying to do the same for the people behind me in the organization. It's a great question.
One more question?
Wow. Yes,
ma'am, in the back.
Sierra Scott, I'm a proud member of the Board of Directors in the class of 2008. David, I've had a chance to hear you speak before, and one of the issues that you brought up that really affected me was how the tornado in Greensburg changed your business plan. So if you would talk about that, and I'd also love to hear if there's been something in your company as well that came along that maybe looked like a negative, but then you turned it into a positive.
Well, as many of you know, the tornado wreaked havoc on Greensburg, and we had a quick shop and a Dillon's, both there, both of which were destroyed. It didn't make any economic sense at all to rebuild Dillon's, and they hadn't reached a decision yet, but they were going to rebuild the quick shop, and they were trying to figure out what to do about Dillon's. Before we decided, Governor Kathleen Sebelius called me and said, I know you have to make a business decision that's right for your company. But before you reach a quick conclusion, I'd encourage you to use some imagination and think about ways in which you can solve your problem and solve the problem for Greensburg, because they have to have a grocery store. And so I went back to the presidents of Quick Shop and Dillon's and said exactly what she said to me. And I said, forget all of our normal ways of doing business. Just think about how you might solve both problems at the same time. And they came up with a joint store that was a Quick Shop Dillon's combination store, a little bit bigger than a Quick Shop, but a lot smaller than a Dillon's. Had fresh meat and produce and bread and so forth, all the perishable stuff, in very small amounts, but then had a regular convenience store there as well. And had it not been for the governor's call and the imagination of the Dillon's division and the Quick Shop division, we wouldn't have figured that out, wouldn't have ever done that. We used to think of Quick Shop and Dillon's as competitors, and we used to internally say, you're better off if you compete against each other because you'll drive better performance on both of your parts. It had never occurred to us that they could cooperate and collaborate in a way that would be productive to our business. Well, roll forward now many years, and one of the places we've collaborated with the C-stores, convenience stores, is gasoline at the supermarkets. And if you go to Dillon's, you probably get the gas rewards. If you don't, you're paying too much for gasoline. But anyway, the whole point is that the gas program has been a huge success for Dillon's, and it came actually from Quick Shop. And it came in part because of the experience we had with that tornado and learning to collaborate within our own business.
Love that.
I know there's not many tornadoes in Midtown Manhattan, but any comparable story of making lemonade out of lemons?
Sure. I mean, that's the whole game of being an entrepreneur. And by this point, I've trained and rewired my brain to the point where anytime I see a problem, I see an equal-sized opportunity on the other side of that, and I'll just focus on it. And I'm trying to think of a specific instance. Perhaps, working with film and television, for instance, we were thrown. I've been, kicked off of many accounts because we didn't actually own our dry cleaning facility. We were a bit of a glorified middleman, and so that initially was a big handicap because we couldn't control production how we'd like. And film, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the show Boardwalk Empire, but they're sticklers about how the garments come out because it's a 1920s period show. But that forced us to create a very interesting and a very elaborate and intricate supply chain management process, where if we couldn't own the dry cleaner, how can we get to the point where the garments would almost come out like we did? And so we would have a phenomenal training system, and we'd sit down with their staff. And initially we paid our vendors by the piece. So I'd pay you $1.50 per shirt or $4 per blazer and so forth. Eventually we determined that it would probably be more beneficial for us to give you more money and do a revenue share. And we could have easily gotten away with 60-40, but we went 50-50 so that our partners were incentivized. And this way we turned our disadvantage into an advantage. And we had so much volume coming in from the film and television productions that we had multiple vendors, and with this process in place, it allowed us to scale up pretty nicely.
Very good. I'm going to have, if each of you guys would take 2 minutes to be the mentors to this audience and give them your walk-away message, if they were young entrepreneurs, what would you tell them to do? Dave, we'll start with you.
Well, my main message I gave actually to the class earlier this afternoon, but I'll repeat it maybe in similar words or different words. Everybody that I know can improve whatever it is they're doing over what they're currently doing. And if you have the attitude that you've arrived, you're dead. If you believe your own press clippings, you're dead. You have to find a way to reinvent yourself each and every year. There's lots of tools to do that. My favorite is getting personal feedback from friends and peers and mentors and anybody else who's willing to give it. Because that feedback can, if you think of iterative learning, help you become a little bit better tomorrow than you were yesterday. And I just think that's essential to success. So anybody I've mentored, and I still mentor a few people around Kroger and others around that I've met, I tell them the same thing. Try to be better every day.
Very good. John?
Love it. For me, when entrepreneurs are beginning out, I think perhaps the most common pitfall that I see is that founders try to boil the ocean and they try to be everything for everybody, but then you end up being nothing to anyone. And so don't confuse the vision, the 10, 20, 30-year vision that you have for the 3 to 6 month action plan. There's riches and niches. So pick a segment and be very, very, very good at that one thing, and that'll be your entry point into the market. And from there, if we're fortunate, it becomes a career as long as Dave's here. So that's my advice to you guys.
Gentlemen, excellent answers. A round of applause.
So may I ask a favor?
I was going to ask you both where you 30 years from now, but I thought that would be unfair.
I'm a millennial, so you know I have to do my social media. So I'm going to turn this camera around, okay, and I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and then I want us all to say Leadership Kansas. Does that sound good? Okay, cool. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, Leadership Kansas. Awesome, thank you. Well,
fantastic.
Great.
Before you leave, we want to let's give them another round of applause.
Thank you.
I think they'll all be sticking around for the grand reception after this. We wanted to make a couple of announcements. The grand reception will be both in this room and in the room down the hall just a piece. Dinner, if you have paid for dinner, will be at 8 o'clock in this room. And then the after-party terrace party is not on the terrace because of the weather. It is downstairs, and we're ready to go. I want to thank Alan Townsend again for sponsoring the great band. Done enough. Spencer Duncan for providing great wine for tonight. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.